This week, Nathan Case is with us to discuss getting rid of CISOs. Then Teresa Lanowitz from AT&T Cybersecurity joins us to talk about securing the edge ecosystem. Finally, in the enterprise security news, OneTrust raises $150 million. Netcraft is a security vendor now. More healthy funding. Thales picks up Imperva for $3.6 billion. Breached orgs unwilling to increase security spending. The death of InfoSec Twitter. SEC finalizes new cybersecurity rule. Placing bets on the Las Vegas Sphere getting hacked during DEF CON even. Backdoors and law enforcement radio gear. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
The cybersecurity landscape is full of single solution providers, making it easy for unexpected cyber threats to sneak through the cracks. That's why Fortra is creating a stronger, simpler strategy for protection, one that increases your security maturity while decreasing the operational burden that comes with it. This is all possible thanks to Fortra's best-in-class portfolio and deep bench of expert problem solvers. Fortra's integrated, scalable solutions help customers face their toughest challenges with confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Fortra, Fortra. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Intern Day. This is episode 325, recorded on Thursday, July 27th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria. I'm not sweating, I'm glistening. And joining me today is the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler. How you doing, Katie?
I'm well. Happy, what's today? The 27th of July. It's almost August.
Happy Intern Day.
Happy Intern Day. Man, I wish I had an intern today.
Oh yeah, busy day?
That would be really helpful. We're a little bit under a time crunch here for a bunch of stuff. So, God, I would appreciate the heck out of that intern.
I could always use an intern. I've always got extra stuff going on that I could toss over to somebody. Also joining us is the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, PSW's new co-host maybe, or just a special guest, Sean Metcalf. How you doing, Sean?
Doing good, Adrian. Adrian's mentioning the fact that I was a guest on Paul Security Weekly last night, so I had to let him know that I was cheating on ESW yesterday. But yeah, no, I'm here at ESW. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I hope that Intern Day means that you get an intern, but apparently not. That has not happened for me yet, at least. Good to be back from vacation and be here with y'all. So, hi.
You are a very different shade from what you were just a couple months ago, I'm pretty sure. You are vacationing correctly, sir.
Thank you. Florida for the win and the hot sun there, although I think the rest of the country is dealing with hot sun right now anyway. So,
right.
Yeah, about the heat. It's too much.
It is a lot. It is a lot. It's like 100 degrees down in Florida right now, at least.
Yeah, it's always crazy when it's like 92 degrees, but the real feel is like 105. I'm like, what is this, Vegas? It's not Vegas yet. I'll be there in a couple weeks, but it's not time yet.
I heard the water is over 100 degrees in some places. The water temperature.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I read that too. It's insane. Like, why? Why would you want? I mean, I can take a shower and it's really, really hot, but that's not refreshing necessarily. Yeah, even in Massachusetts, the real feel today is 100. So guess who's not going outside very much?
Yeah, I am inside. I just got back from the gym, and And yeah, I've just stopped sweating, so I'm not going to go. I'm going to chill out on this podcast for a little bit, and we're going to get into some interesting, spicy stuff today. We got a lot of good interviews and news topics to cover.
Adrian,
intern, aka her cat, is staying indoors.
Gus, the intern.
Right.
I don't think Gus is very useful as an intern, though. Just guessing, Katie.
Well, he's not present at the moment, so he's definitely not doing anything useful.
Yeah. All right, let's get going here. Quick announcement. Security Weekly listeners, InfoSec World 2023 is heading back to, guess where? Orlando, Florida. Join the but it'll be cooler by September. Maybe. We'll see. Join the InfoSec community at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort, September 23rd through 28th, 2023. Experience world-class learning and networking through enlightening keynotes, informative panel discussions, interactive breakout sessions, hands-on workshops and summits, and more. And I've been to this event, and I've been to that venue, and they do have AC inside, in case you're worried about that. As a Security Weekly community member, you're able to receive 20% off your InfoSec World 2023 tickets using code ISW23-SecWeek20. Register today at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2023. All right, today's topic is, and I am having fun with it a little bit. We're not, don't take this entirely seriously, but today's topic is firing your CISO. We're excited to have Nathan Case with us today. Nate's background is in incident response and operational security. He's very at home pushing the boundaries of threat detection and response. Welcome to the show, Nate.
Hey, it's great to be here.
All right. And if you want to go beat up Nate for this topic, his address is...
Yeah, very funny. I think it's a great to start with, though. I mean, it as you put it, it's a very spicy opener. Maybe we should get into like what that actually means, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say firing your CISO, isn't that what a lot of companies do anyway as a scapegoat?
Right. That is the end point, yes. I think we can look at the longevity of most CISOs. What is the average currently? Is it something like 2 years?
18 months is what I heard, and I think that was trending upward at 18 months from what I heard. And the trouble is not only the average tenure of the CISO, but the average gap in between, because you can't just hire a new CISO overnight. Like that process takes at least 6 months and sometimes a year or more in some cases, just a talent search and then negotiation and all that stuff. It's not easy.
No intern CISO on intern day?
Maybe a vCISO.
vCISO. There you go.
That's another topic.
Yeah, it is a different topic. But yeah, let's just lay some foundation here. You know, I think everybody would agree that our first time out, we didn't necessarily do security correctly. You know, it's still a very new field. You know, I don't think CISO was even, you know, a common term that people would recognize until, well, depending on who we're talking to, you know, maybe, you know, 2 decades ago, you know, I remember starting to see the term, and, you know, you started seeing companies with CISOs, but, you know, a lot of times they were under the director of IT or something like that. They weren't very high up in the org. And yeah, it's been a bit of a rocky path trying to figure out, you know, how do you insert security leadership into an organization in a functional way? How do you build out those teams? How do those teams work with the rest of the business to achieve, you know, reduction of risk? You know, reduction, even talking about risk, like what should those goals be? So I think that's kind of lays the foundation for. Sure, of course, we're going to talk about the role of the CISO and whether or not we're doing that correctly, right? And that's kind of the topic for today, right, Nate?
That is the goal. As spicy as you can open it with, let's fire the CISO. I think the real forward here is, what is the CISO and what's the right place for a CISO? What should that CISO be doing? Do we use them correctly today or not?
Right, and I think we see them used. I mean, CISO's a very different role. Like, I have a bunch of friends who are CISOs at security vendors, or even just normal vendors, and that's a very different role. Where you're partially part of the sales team, you're partially part of the product team. Maybe you're responsible for product security, for evangelism, and then for just plain old IT security, right? So you end up with all these different roles, and you get to juggle between them. Whereas in a more traditional setting, just defending your average company, it's mainly that. It could be mainly that IT security role, but then there's the CISO with the I and the CISO without the I, and different responsibility sets there as well. So already we've got many different ideas of security. Some of them are actual executives. Some of them are several levels below that executive tier, and have different levels of like you could have a CISO with zero budget and zero purchase authority, or someone with a multi-million-dollar budget, right? So already it's all over the place, right?
How do we balance that? What is the actual role? What is the thought that we're looking for here? And if I may, I think the concept here is, if we're going to have a company and we're going to do security, we should all be doing security. Who is the top person responsible for that security? Is there one person responsible for that security? Is it something that we should all be part of, or is there a single individual that should get blamed when there's a breach?
Right. And I think we should start diving into some of those questions. So, and I'm strongly opinionated on this, that I don't think a security team or a CISO can succeed without some of that responsibility existing with asset owners or people who own portions of the business and things like that. The security team can never be an expert on anything. You're never going to have enough security staff to find every issue, and tell everybody to fix those issues in enough time. But also, I think, ultimately, it's probably, the end answer to all this is it's going to have to be a process, because, depending on the organization and their needs and their wants, there isn't one model for a CISO or a security team that's going to work for everybody, or even a lot of people.
Well, I think I would double click on the statement of, there aren't enough people. There aren't. I mean, if we're really honest about, what that looks like, does one team of, I was talking to a friend, last week, and she was telling me how she was a 2-person incident response team on a multinational manufacturing company. And when you look
with
at
hopefully
that
someone on retainer, right?
Yeah, but no, there were no retainers, there were no consultants. It was really just her and her friend. And I mean, I get it, totally, it's one of those things. Budget is budget, but at the same time, we start rolling that up, and we roll that up under the CISO, and we look at a CISO and we say, okay, so if the company really does care about security, then what is the budget appropriate to that? I think as we look at a lot of the layoffs that we were somewhat joking about originally, CISOs are something that gets let go. Why? I think it really comes down to the concept that we need to change the way we think about security. Is it something that we just try to push off to the side and make one small group of people handle? Or is it something that we all need to go ahead and step up and kind of embrace? Kind of like, well, honestly, like we were talking about in the original interview between you and I. Is security something that one person in a company is responsible for? Or is it something we should be building a culture for? And I think there's plenty of people out there jumping up and down and screaming about building a security culture. But at the same time, how do we do that? What does that really look like? As we drill into security culture, do you have your developers doing security? Have you actually enabled them as a CISO? And in many cases, a lot of the places that I've been historically, I've seen a lot of people try to push that security culture into developers and really miss on some of that security awareness or security, I would call it security championing, similar to the OWASP project that just got released a couple of days ago.
Right. Yeah. So, one thing, that really changed my thinking on this. There's a paper called, let me get it correct. It's Better Testing Worse Quality by Elizabeth Hendrickson. And she published it in 2001, and she's in the quality assurance field, software quality assurance. And what's interesting is I think she found something similar to what we're finding now. Obviously quality assurance is a little bit older. than security, but not a huge amount, was that by having a QA team, it sent the signal that you don't need to developers, that you don't need to worry about security. There's now a quality team, that there's somebody with that in their title that is now responsible for that. So they saw quality of code go down dramatically after introducing the QA team. People were just throwing stuff over the wall. They weren't doing as much testing, functional testing or regression testing, any kind of testing, building tests for their code. And she found to fix it, two key things she had to do is restrict, create an artificial bottleneck of the number of QA resources there are, and also push responsibility back onto the developers for shipping good quality functional code over to QA. By restricting that and shifting responsibility back, now it's on them. They're incentivized to get their code through in as few passes as possible. They don't want to see that bump back to them. But then you have to make an allotment for that. If you've got your developers 110% utilized, you can't then tell them, okay, now you're also responsible for security, and you can't afford to have this bouncing back without giving them the extra headroom to do that, right?
What I would argue is, I would put in there, not argue, I suppose. I would completely agree with you in that that's a totally 100% agree with you on that thought. But how do we get that developer to have that ability? Do we just hand them code and tell them to write secure code? It's not going to happen. We have to push the tools that are security tools now left as far as we can back to that developer, so that as the developer is pounding away on the keyboard, they begin to see, hey, I can't use this library. It needs to be updated, or I need to do this, or that to make my code a little bit more secure. I mean, we talk about SSRF. There was a release, what was it, yesterday, on one of the wiki companies, and in an effort not to call them out. But because of this, what happened? Why did the remote code execution vulnerability that's currently released get into the wild? Well, obviously somebody made a mistake, but wouldn't that have been caught in secure in a code review? Well, arguably no, right? I mean, if, again, back to your point, if we have everybody writing code as quickly as possible and we're trying to get it left to right, it becomes exceptionally hard to do that. I think it's interesting in that it's almost the inverse of the Phoenix project, but you start looking at how you need to, in your words, trim the resource, or how did you put it? Constrain the resources, I believe, so that you can force security to be a thing, as opposed to something that they have to think about later because it's somebody else's problem. And I think it exemplifies the way that we've been doing security for the last 20 years. You start looking at security being tacked onto the end of a project or gating a project at any of the Fortune 10s you want to point at. We need to architect for security at the very beginning, so that as the developer begins to write code, as they begin to use the tools that they use, they understand what we're actually asking for, and then we as security people are asking for, and then are able to actually deliver that at the end, as opposed to find out 2 weeks before the project's supposed to go live that, oh yeah, by the way, you have to use port 443.
So specifically around developer security, Microsoft implemented the widely taunted or touted, depending on your perspective, trustworthy computing a number of years ago. Do you feel like that's something that can point to, hey, if you have developers focus on security, things get better? Or do you think that was more of like a point in time and we have to do more and better now? And I'm going to throw this out as a buzzword bingo question. And will developers using AI make this better?
Oh, will developers using AI make
Damn it, Sean.
Developers using AI will always make everything better. What the hell? Obviously. Yeah, that's a whole different security ball of wax to start unpacking. I would tell you that in my experience that developers and teams will write more secure code given better tools and given better observability and understanding. So in many cases, if you give somebody a tool and say, I need you to go do a thing, like let's take it totally outside of IT. If I hand you my table saw and I tell you to go make me a chair and then walk away, how well will that go? Obviously, it's probably not going to go horribly well unless you've got a background in woodworking. But similarly, if I, as a security professional, hand you a developer a requirement, let's say take a NIST requirement or any of the other CMMC, take your pick, and say that we have to live up to this thing and then walk away. I don't know that it really gets any better. So I think part of this is giving somebody tools, but also then sitting down and helping people understand more completely, what does it mean when we say we want you to write secure code? And I don't know if there's a
because you don't want fingers and blood everywhere, right?
Well, yeah. Back to the analogy, fingers and blood suck. But when we get back to the AI and the things that we could do, sure, absolutely. There's definitely a place for a co-pilot or something to sit next to you and go, hey, that's a good idea or a bad idea. Now, as the security geek, there's portions of me that think about you transiting all of that data out to an open model somewhere in a public forum, and that's a bad idea. But how do we then implement that appropriately for a developer inside of a large company or even a small company so that they can have the things they need local to them actually building the code or writing the code to understand whether they wrote good code or bad code? Should we have synthetic tests that the developers get to see as they begin to write the things? Should those synthetic tests have actually been all the way back in the stories and the business requirements when the developers and the project manager and the product owner were talking about what they expected and wanted? And I think the answer is yes.
I think one of the challenges that we continue to see is the same sort of things over and over again. And this is definitely a trend in the industry. It's not just around code and development, it's systems, security, enterprise security, as we talk about it here on the podcast every week. We are still seeing the same things, buffer overflows, we're seeing cross-site scripting, the same sort of things over and over again. So if developers have a way to help them better identify that as they're writing code or through checkpoints along the way, do you think that's a process that can help? I mean, first of all, I can say if you give me a table saw and even give me directions on how to build something, it's not going to be a good thing at all. So I get your analogy. It won't work for me because I can't do that. But for good developers that write good code, maybe they don't need as much help, but certainly as people are writing code across an organization, or you talk about, I'm going to bring up Microsoft again, they have hundreds of developers, if not more, that are collaborating on a code base like Windows or components of that code base. And then you have the interplay or interaction and dependency between the different components of that system, and that makes it very complex. Are we at the point where code is so complex that we have to have some sort of helper system there? Or do you feel like there's still processes that we can do along the way in order to identify and help make that code better?
So you brought up a really interesting point. Code complexity equals good or safe or secure code. So I was actually reading a blog a couple of days ago on what code complexity is and why we as developers, why we as security people, why we as geeks write complex code. And we're not talking about writing obviously bad complex code, but rather what we would maybe consider complex because we want to show off code. I think there's something to be said for writing code that the developer or any developer can actually understand as they read it, so that it is both efficient and understandable, as opposed to maybe we use the word elegant. Maybe it's elegant, but nobody could possibly ever understand the functions that you're using to get to the end point. Was that really good code or not? Is it more or less secure than the code that was relatively simple, but it was written in a simple/elegant way so that anybody can read it? And is that actually something that needs to get tagged to code in general? But I think then we get into a developer podcast, and that's probably not where we want to go. But to your point, sorry.
Go ahead and wrap up your point. Yeah, that's where I was going also. I was going to pull it back up a level or two.
Sorry. But as we get into security and we think about that, I think it comes down to a really good coder is someone who is able to sit and evaluate the code that they're writing, both for, is it secure? Is it rationally secure? Do I have the tools with me that I can do that with? Maybe we're looking at something like an automated pen test system at the end of your build that actually shows you whether or not you have something that is appropriate to the things that we expected it to be. That's where I get into synthetic testing that is part of development, as opposed to synthetic testing that is evaluating whole chunks of code or whole chunks of an application when it's been produced and put into production. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so
feels like it.
So let's Sean?
Sorry, yeah, absolutely. I had to find my mute button.
By the way, I have that very t-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
Should have brought it.
So well, I mean, it is a good conversation because that is one of the bigger challenges, right? But not necessarily all orgs even have code that they're building, right? There's orgs out there that have minimal to no developers even, but still have security challenges. And, but certainly, it's been interesting. I think that is one of the big shifts we've seen where, we might have gone down some wrong paths early on where, I think it kind of started with the rugged manifesto, and now, Kelly Shortridge has a book out on chaos engineering and or chaos security engineering, and it's a very different approach to building stuff than we've done in the past. We've had so many shifts, and I'm not sure that the CISO role, how we build the security team, like all that's still catching up. And it's like the stuff we talk about on this show tends to be like emerging tech and trends and things like that. But I'm also IANS faculty, so on a weekly basis, I'll talk to companies that are running their very first vulnerability scan, and are not familiar with any of this stuff that we talk about on this podcast. And it's almost like taking a time machine back. So there's still a lot of companies out there that aren't even aware of how to engage with developers. They're doing it for the first time today. So going back up to the top here, how should we think about doing security leadership at an organization, and who should that CISO role, this was your question, sorry, Sean, but yeah, where should that leadership exist? I know my opinion is kind of that it shouldn't necessarily sit with the CISO. Like the CISO has responsibility with security, formal responsibility, but ultimately I think it's the whole company, right? Like all leadership should be pushing for security, just like they push for revenue, for privacy, for everything else that is like a company value, right? That's important to the whole company.
I would hope so. I mean, like to your point about not everybody has developers, or not every organization has developers. Well, what about the CFO and that CFO's downline? Would she have developers or not? Well, if we open that up, I've dealt with a lot of incidents from finance organizations, including Excel VB scripts in their Excel documents because they needed to go ahead and do stuff. Is that person a developer? Well, arguably, yes and no, right? I mean, they don't have a background, they don't have any training, but they're doing something that they saw in Stack Overflow and they're copy and pasting it into their Excel sheet, and off we go. So to your point, and dragging it to the very edge of reality and looking at it from kind of a nonsensical point of view and calling that person, let's just go ahead and embrace it and say, this person is a developer, they're a financial developer. And if that's true, then realistically, to your point, and I completely agree with you, by the way, that the CISO probably is maybe we call it the spiritual top of the food chain here, the responsibility holder for security, but that responsibility doesn't sit just with that person. That responsibility is passed to every person in the company. So even the CFO needs to understand that there's some level of connection to the actions that their people take, that they take on a day-to-day basis, and that the things that she will be doing or that her people would be doing would then also have the impact on the security of the company. Should we have included that plugin in our Excel spreadsheet that had the books for the entire company in it? Well, no. And there's a whole discussion about that to be had. But I think that's where we get into the issue, because a lot of the security people that I've worked with in the past, and a lot of the companies that I've either advised or talked to in the past, will have a very small security team, and that security team is generally overwhelmed, and they need the ability to spread out and communicate and connect with a lot of other people. And I don't know how you feel about it yourself, but I know there are times when I've been horribly grumpy, and as a security person, especially after an incident, it can be easy to be a little bit grumpy. And I think what happens is we don't do a good job communicating, befriending, helping the other organizations we don't see as needed today. I think that's partly on us, and we need to it and say, look, we need to get better at doing that. We need to include everybody.
I think there's everything looks like a nail type of issue here also. Like, my opinion is, sure, a lot of this stuff is a shared responsibility. Security can help with things like business email compromise, but ultimately, I feel like business email compromise was always a lack of robust accounting processes. Like you should just have, and you can go back and you can look at accounting best practices. And yeah, a single email shouldn't be able to reroute a multi-million-dollar payment to a vendor without some kind of some kind of additional check there. That's I don't think the solution is necessarily NLP and analyzing emails for BEC. Like sure, that can help, but I think the ultimate fix is, should this bank account have changed from, Bank of America to, something in the Seychelles or something like that, right?
I agree. I think as we get into what is automation and we get into what is security, a lot of it becomes making sure that people do things that people are good at. I think that goes back to one of the things that Steve Schmidt said a long time ago. We shouldn't be able to type things in the command line if we can automate it. And
exactly.
I tend to be very...
Yeah, Steve Schmidt, by the way, led the security group at AWS for a number of years. I think he's now, what's his role now?
I believe he's CISO at Amazon now, isn't he?
Yeah. I knew when things got shifted around there, but talking to him was always really interesting because he, at the scale of that company, he looked at things very differently. Like a lot of their goals for the security team was to have less and less access to systems every year, to reduce the amount of access they had to systems because they knew it was a liability. Every person that had access to underlying workloads and things like that at Amazon Web Services, that increased liability. So how can we do this job and remove the risk of somebody fat fingering something or, very human mistakes, right?
Yeah. So I was just actually having this conversation yesterday with a friend, and she asked me, well, how would you go ahead and set this up? My response was, nobody has access to production unless they have a ticket and then they've signed in with their two-factor and then they actually are going to do work that is associated with that ticket. We do that by assigning roles to things and then making sure that the resources are attached to those roles.
So access isn't persistent, right? It's just in time.
You don't have access to everything all the time. I don't want to have access to all the passwords. Never do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Should your CISO have access to all your passwords?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, and it's there's just a lot of these assumptions that we still have, and it's funny how many things just go back to the principle of least privilege, like one of the oldest ideas. Much older than the idea of having a security team or a security role in a business. Least privilege goes back to like the 70s, even formally. Yeah,
that even before we had IT, we had this idea.
Right. And it's and it's still it's challenging to change that thinking, and then it's challenging to actually apply it to the environment. Like I remember when microsegmentation first came out, and I was talking to one of the first vendors in that space. I asked the question, how is this not like going from 8 firewalls to 8,000 all of a sudden? The idea that you're going to have some kind of custom DMZ between every machine-to-machine relationship, and there just wasn't a great answer for it. Some of those companies are still around, so I assume they found some kind of answer to that. But then Zero Trust came in and kind of replaced some of that mentality, I guess. But yeah, just keeping up with the trends here, and somebody comes up with a better idea, and that's part of what we try and do with the show is highlight where those shifts are happening and where people should be looking, when people come up with a better answer to those questions. But yeah, certainly I think the staffing thing is a difficult one. So going back to CISOs again, I think one of the challenges here, just talking about products and vendors and microsegmentation and things like that. If your CISO cycling out every 18 months or even less, and then it takes another 6 to 12 months to find another one, a lot of organizations just end up with this kind of island of misfit projects, right? Like a lot of these projects don't get done before those CISOs leave, and the new one comes in, and they have a particular set of vendors they prefer to work with, or there's a particular pet project that they want to focus on. Like how do you smooth all that out when the role of security leadership is constantly changing or just so volatile?
Well, I don't know that there's a way to, really, right? I mean, we have to change the way we look at that role so that we can change the way that we're dealing with all of the other things that go along with it. If we unpack that and turn it into a question about how do we do projects appropriately, securely, regardless of who's being the leader right now, how do we, let's say we're a company in this position right now, wouldn't it be easier for us to take the reality that, we're probably handling security the wrong way? Wouldn't it be better if we re-ingested security into our architecture team? And that may be a really good point of view to do it. I've got a couple of friends over at Discover, and actually that's kind of the way they're thinking about doing it now, is to begin to roll security into that architecture lead or the architecture pyramid of the portion of the company, so that regardless of how cool Sean is, when he's an amazing CISO, it turns into this question about how do we actually go ahead and include security in each of the projects independent of that CISO. Is that?
Yeah, no, I think that's the area I wanted to kind of explore, and I think Sean has an angle on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're basically talking about is the CISO role and how it's kind of evolved over time. There was an idea of what it would be, and at certain companies, there's an idea of what it could be or maybe what it should be. And so I love your approach of the CISO kind of being the spiritual leader, and I just kind of envision everyone getting around the fire and singing Kumbaya together, and the CISO go, you will do assessments of your environment, you will perform least privilege, you will write secure code, you will use MFA and things like that. And then people walk away and they're excited about it.
Yes.
That would be great. We're not there yet. I've certainly seen that the more successful companies when it comes to security are the ones where everyone is involved in security. The developers, those that manage systems, those look at it and go, yeah, something's not right here. Maybe we should figure this out. And one of the things that I've seen that's kind of a challenge are those companies that kind of just go about security kind of willy-nilly. There isn't really a plan, there isn't basically an approach, and there isn't really a strong CISO or a CISO that is helping moving things forward. And I think one of the challenges that we had in the industry is security always kind of says no, and business operations needs to advance and needs to be accounted for there. So with all this together, where do you see the CISO role as far as what it is today? And ideally, who do you think the CISO should report to? And are there situations where this reporting structure would or should vary?
So I'm going to do the whole consultant thing and say it depends. Wow. So let me start off with, and let me make sure I got the questions right, the questions in line here. We've got, where should it report to? How should we do it so that it drives security as a culture? And what was the third one? Did I miss the third one?
It's basically the reporting structure and the relevance of it. What should a CISO actually be doing really to move us forward versus where we've been? So
I am very much of the opinion, and I would hope that you both agree with me, that a CISO is the person that is supposed to drive the thought, I'm going to say thought leadership, apologies, that is supposed to actually drive the belief of security, what is security for this company, into the company itself. And that is the root goal of what they're doing. Now, is that GRC? Is that detection? Is that incident response? Yes, it's all of those things, and it's different in each of those models. So if I, as a CISO, stand up and say, hey, we've got to be better about secrets management, then I, as a CISO, should also be prepared to deal with correcting the governance principles that we run the company by to correct the fact that we're not handling secrets correctly. And then, is that me personally? Probably not. It's me delegating to a GRC team. But it's not a statement that, hey, everybody, you have to do this, and if you're not doing this specific thing, you're not allowed to do, something else. These concepts should be the concepts of, hey, look, we have a business goal we have to meet. Okay, cool. Let me come up creatively with a way to help you meet that goal through GRC, in this case, if we're going to go through key management and key safety. But as we look at that, then how do I build out appropriate policies that allow my developers to get to a place where they need to and want to and intentionally try to keep aligned with that governance policy and regulations? And I think as we get to regulations, we start jumping into what does that structure look like? I totally, honestly, think that it's personality based. I think there's a good argument for having the CISO report directly to the CEO. If you have a company that is generally very, we'll call it leadership driven, maybe more militaristic, I think having that CISO report to the CEO gives you a certain level of peers discussing things and working together. Now, realistically, I don't have a problem with the CISO reporting to the CIO or the CTO, or the other way around and have the CTO report to the CISO. All of these things are okay because realistically, if you're doing technology correctly, you're doing it securely. So arguably, if everything is going the right way, why couldn't you just have the technology team entirely rolled into the security team? And why can't those two teams coexist? Well, I think they can. I think if we do this the right way and we build the right team and build the right trust, it's totally a possibility. We just have to, as leaders, as people who are doing it, make sure that we build that trust. And as we get into problems with awkward development or things that got missed in architectural architectural design, how do we approach those security issues with our developer brothers and try to figure out how are we going to approach that security issue together, as opposed to just telling them no and they've got to go fix it.
That makes a lot of sense. So I've got a spicy follow-on question to that. Should a CISO be fired if there's a security incident?
Well, it's an interesting question. Do you feel like a security guard should be fired if somebody breaks into your house? Or should a police officer be fired if somebody breaks into the house? And my gut here is no. I think we've decided that it's okay to fire a CISO because that CISO has been responsible as the top of the pyramid for security. And I think that belies the concept that as we all as humans begin to look at security in a company, in a large company specifically, we feel like that CISO is the person that has taken responsibility for all of it. And 9 times out of 10, if we're all very honest, they may have responsibility, but they have no ability to change it. And that's kind of an issue. So if we kind of roll that back and take it apart, I personally believe that part of the issue that we have with leadership right now is that we don't allow our leaders to make mistakes. And we need to allow them to make mistakes and consequently go forward anyway. And there are times when, sure, everybody's going to get breached. It's not something that you can avoid. It will happen. Security in depth and a breach should only be 1 or 2 layers, and you shouldn't. All of these things are true, but eventually a really bad thing's going to happen and you're going to have to deal with it, whether that be an insider or outsider, take your pick. And when that day comes, removing your CISO from the equation because they were the person in charge at the time, unless they've made some gross negligent error, really just removes the investment that you've made in that individual in your company, for better or for worse. And 9 times out of 10, I would argue that it's probably for worse.
Yeah, it's almost like there's mental gymnastics around that, where we assume breach and every organization or company will get breached or has been breached or could get breached. But at the same time, if there is one, we're going to fire the person who has been trying to move the needle and make the environment more secure, or at least the person who is the biggest cheerleader of that, the spiritual leader, the kumbaya person behind that.
Well, I think as we get to it, I mean, like, how do you prove that security is working? Nothing happened. And that's always the issue, right? Like, you don't have a proof that says, hey, I'm doing good security, this thing happened. No, in fact, I'm doing good security, nothing happened.
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's so much other. There's some good chat in the good questions in the chat as well. You know, talking about organizations too small to even have security leadership. You know, which I think gets into in my experience, I've noticed a lot of places where if the entire executive team doesn't take security seriously, like if it's only the security leadership you ever hear talk about it, it's really difficult to be successful. So I think that kind of applies to smaller organizations as well, where you don't have any formal security leadership there, and a lot of things end up getting outsourced. You're kind of missing that spiritual position, that evangelist. I feel more comfortable calling it an evangelist, or I don't know, maybe there's a better term, but yeah, if somebody's
that whole section.
Advocate,
let's call it.
Yeah, advocate works. Yeah. But yeah. If otherwise, it just comes across as just one of these things you do for compliance, one of these things you have to do. Just boxes you have to check, just cost of doing business, and people don't take it as seriously. But yeah, sadly, I think we're about out of time. So, but before we let you go, Nate, I think you've got a talk coming up at Hacker Summer Camp, don't you? B-Sides, maybe?
Two of them. I'm going to be speaking at B-Sides Las Vegas, and I'm going to be speaking at Biohacking Village. Also, next week, if anybody's into it and happens to be in San Francisco, I'm doing a workshop at Dash for intro incident response. And literally, it's written so that everybody can come and do it, even if you have absolutely no background in incident response or technology. So lots of fun stuff coming up. We're going to do 2 tabletops at DEF CON. That should be a lot of fun. Both the Blue Team Village and the Biohacking Village got together this year and put together kind of a rolling tabletop for, I believe, Friday and Sunday.
Very cool. Very cool. So tabletops involving like hospital situations?
That would be telling. It is indeed hospital and
is it somewhat secret? Should I not?
It's a little bit secret. I don't want to give it away, but yeah, it should be a lot of fun. And those as well are set up so that you can be a geek, totally geek out and have a good time, but you can also be just somebody that wants to come and learn and get into it and decide whether security and stuff like that is for you.
Awesome. Yeah, I've worked with the Biohacking Village folks in the past. I don't know if there's the same folks still, but awesome people do a really great job with that village. So that sounds like a lot of fun. All right, Nate, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. It was a great conversation. We could possibly have a part 2 about it. There's still so much to discuss, but thanks for being here and having it with us.
I'm happy to be here. Hey, one more plug. I tell you what, Kim, one of our groups is actually running a Black Hat job fair. And if you happen to be looking for a gig or want to potentially hire people, that'd be a great place to stop by at Black Hat.
Good stuff. Yeah, thank you so much. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk edge computing with Teresa Lanowitz from AT&T Cybersecurity.